Everyone loves a quiet cul-de-sac until the monster 3 doors down drops his mask. For 8 months, I tracked Viktor Malenko, a ghost smuggling restricted electronics under the cover of a jiu-jitsu instructor. Then he choked my wife and slammed her against his Tesla. He thought he saw a soft, middle-aged IT consultant. He didn't know I was a 17-year agency ground branch veteran. The surveillance mission was over. The extraction was about to begin. To the neighbors on Maplewood Court, Viktor Malenko was just a wealthy private security contractor with a black belt and a Tesla. To the agency, he was a ghost, a mid-level facilitator moving restricted electronics through an Eastern European smuggling ring into the hands of pariah states. For 8 months, I had mapped his routes, photographed his dead drops, and identified the couriers who rotated through his gym. But I never had proof he would turn violent on American soil, until he did. The question was no longer whether he was dangerous. It was whether I could still protect my country while protecting my family. 8 months earlier, the question had been simpler. I was sitting in a windowless room at Langley with a satellite phone on the table and a heavily redacted file in front of me. My handler, Alan Mercer, had the tired eyes of a man who had spent 30 years watching bad people get rich. He told me Viktor Malenko was a ghost, and ghosts don't leave fingerprints. Malenko was 41 years old, Bulgarian by birth, carrying a Canadian passport and an American green card. On paper, he was a close protection contractor for hedge fund executives and a certified Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt. In reality, he was the central node of a network moving restricted electronics, field programmable gate arrays, radiation-tolerant microcontrollers, high-bandwidth encrypted transceivers. The kind of components that can turn a crude ballistic missile into a precision-guided weapon. The end destination was a pariah state with nuclear ambitions, the kind of place where an American intelligence officer would be hanged from a crane. My assignment was to become wallpaper. I had spent 17 years in Ground Branch, the agency's paramilitary arm. I had run operations in the Hindu Kush, extracted defectors from Mogadishu, and survived an ambush in the Bekaa Valley that left 2 of my men dead. But this was different. This was home. I was to move into a leased colonial on Maplewood Court, assume the identity of Daniel Rourke, a self-employed IT security consultant, and observe. No contact, no engagement, no heroics, just pattern of life analysis. Catherine, my wife, thought we were relocating for a contract with a defense contractor in Virginia. She had never known the full truth about my work, and I had spent 17 years making peace with that lie. She was a clinical pharmacist at a pediatric hospital. She trusted me. She loved our golden retriever, Amos. She watered the azaleas in the front yard and chatted with the neighbors about trash pickup. She had no idea she was walking through a live surveillance operation every time she stepped outside. The first 2 months were uneventful. Malenko followed a rigid routine. Every morning at 5:30, he left his house in designer joggers and ran 4 miles through the neighborhood. Then he drove his black Tesla to Ascend Tactical Combat, where he taught a 6 a.m. executive class. At exactly 9:15, he ordered an espresso from the coffee shop next to the gym. At 12:30, he met with a rotating cast of men in luxury sedans in the rear parking lot behind a tire shop. They never touched. They never spoke for more than 90 seconds. They exchanged small, nondescript packages, a FedEx envelope, a duffel bag, a hard-sided briefcase. I logged every meeting, every license plate, every face. The agency fed the plates into a database. Most came back as front companies registered in Limassol, Cyprus. But Malenko was careful. He never used a phone inside the gym. He swept his car for trackers every 2 weeks. He had security cameras around his house, hidden in the eaves and disguised as birdhouses. I watched him through a telescopic lens from my second-floor office. Just a middle-aged IT consultant bored at his desk. I wore a wrinkled polo and kept a coffee mug in my hand. I let my shoulders slump. I practiced looking harmless. The first sign that something had changed came in the early summer. Malenko started bringing his work home. Literally. One Tuesday in June, I watched him unload a hard-sided Pelican case from the Tesla and carry it into his garage. He should have been emptying his mind after a long day. Instead, he was pacing, arguing on a burner phone, gesturing with the kind of violence that makes a man dangerous. He kicked a trash can. He slammed the garage door so hard the window rattled. Catherine looked up from her crossword and asked if I'd heard something. I told her it was probably a neighbor's car backfiring, but I knew better. Malenko was under pressure. His network was being squeezed, perhaps by a rival cell or by our own interagency colleagues. The pressure made him sloppy. He started missing his morning runs. He began drinking on his front porch late at night, staring at the street. Once, at exactly 2 a.m., he walked to the edge of his lawn and stood perfectly still, looking toward my house. My office lights were off. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. He stayed there for 11 minutes. Then he went back inside. Then came the night of September 9th. I was reviewing footage in my office when I saw something that stopped my heart. On the screen, grainy and green from the night vision mode, Malenko stood in his basement, holding up a photograph. It was a photo of his neighborhood, but it wasn't from a security camera. It was a still frame from a video. The angle was from across the street, from just behind a blue sedan parked near my driveway. In the corner of the frame was a reflection, the rear panel of a car with a faint, blurred image of a man sitting inside holding a camera. The man was me. Malenko had spotted my surveillance, and now he was reconstructing the picture. My cover as a soft IT consultant was only as good as the assumption that Malenko never looked too closely at his neighbors. He was starting to look. But the question of whether he had fully identified me remained unanswered. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. Then, on a Thursday afternoon in late September, I saw him in the front yard with a tablet, walking along the property line, comparing something on the screen to the view of my house. He was measuring angles. He was running my plate. He was performing counter-surveillance. He wasn't just suspicious, he was hunting. I put in an urgent request to Alan for extraction of Catherine. The request was denied. Too many moving parts, too much risk to the overall operation. Keep your head down, stay in character. That was the order. But all of that changed on the last Thursday of the month. It was unseasonably warm. I was at my desk, the encrypted satellite phone in my right hand, the 911 call screen on my left. The window was open. The smell of cut grass drifted in. And then I heard it. Catherine's voice, high and tight, saying something to Amos. And then another voice, low and thick with an Eastern European accent, telling her to teach her dog some respect. I looked out the window just as Malenko grabbed her by the collar. That was the moment I realized my two worlds, the secret and the real, had just collided. The surveillance mission was over. The extraction was about to begin. I didn't call 911, not right away, because the moment Malenko slammed Catherine against the Tesla and stared at me through the window, I understood something worse than the attack. The look he gave me wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. He wanted me to come outside. He wanted to see what I would do. Catherine stumbled back, gasping, clutching her collar. Amos barked. Malenko turned and walked back toward his house without a word. He didn't run. He didn't look back. His stride was calm, deliberate. For a man who had just committed a violent assault in broad daylight, he looked satisfied. I made a call, but not to the police. I called Alan Mercer. His voice came through the encrypted line with the usual gray weight. He listened while I described exactly what happened. The choke, the slam, the glare. There was a long silence. Then he said 3 words that turned my blood cold. He was testing you. Alan explained that Malenko's operational record showed a pattern. Before he ever escalated to wet work, he instigated a domestic incident, a fender bender, a property dispute, a dog on a lawn. He used local police responses to gauge whether a target had official backup, whether the neighbor was really just a neighbor. The choke wasn't ego, it was a provocation with a purpose. That changed everything. For months I had assumed Malenko had a suspicion, but no confirmation. Now the signs reversed. He didn't just suspect me, he had started working me. The night he stood on his lawn for 11 minutes, the tablet with the angles, the photograph in his basement. These weren't random counter-surveillance. They were the preliminaries of a man preparing to neutralize a threat. Catherine was not a random victim. She was a data point in Malenko's threat assessment. And my response would determine the next move. I called the police, not because I wanted them, because a normal IT consultant would, and because I needed the official record. 2 officers from Fairfax County arrived in 20 minutes. They took Catherine's statement on our front porch. They photographed the red marks on her neck and the scrape on her elbow where she hit the pavement. They knocked on Malenko's door. He answered in a pressed polo, calm and smiling. He told them the dog had charged at him, that Catherine had been aggressive, that he had simply defended himself. There were no independent witnesses. His security cameras, he said, would show the incident from his angle. The camera above his garage had been angled toward the street, but he claimed the hard drive had failed that morning. The officers were polite but helpless. They filed a report, gave Catherine a victim's rights brochure, and told Malenko to stay away from us. Malenko nodded, apologized for the misunderstanding, and closed the door. I watched from my office. The report number went into my encrypted log. The body cam footage would be requested by an agency liaison within the hour. That night, I did the one thing I had sworn I would never do. I took Catherine into the garage, closed the door, and placed a small black box on the workbench. It was a portable biometric scanner. I told her it was a security upgrade from work. She was too shaken to question it. I scanned her fingerprints, her irises, and the subdermal vein pattern in her left wrist. I uploaded the data to a secure agency cloud under an alias. If Malenko or his network ever tried to grab her, I wanted every law enforcement and intelligence asset on the eastern seaboard to be able to identify her in under a minute. Catherine asked me why I was doing this. I told her it was because the man next door was dangerous, and I wanted to be prepared. She looked at me then with something I had never seen in 20 years of marriage. Doubt, not disbelief, not confusion. Doubt about who I actually was. I saw the way he looked at you, she said. He knew you, not like a neighbor, like an enemy. I told her he was just a paranoid gym owner with a short temper. The lie tasted like ash. The next morning, I received the first major intelligence break of the operation. Alan sent a compressed file through the secure server. It contained 3 still images from a traffic camera near Dulles Airport. The images showed Malenko meeting with a man named Cyrus Ravin, a dual Iranian-Canadian businessman who ran a shell company in Dubai. We had flagged Ravin 2 years earlier as a procurement broker for prohibited missile components. He had never before been linked to Malenko. Now here they were, sharing a car outside an airport hotel. The file also contained a single line of intercepted text from a burner phone we had seeded into the network through a courier who turned informant. The message was in Bulgarian. Translated, it read, "The nosy neighbor has been identified. Proceed with the cleanup." No date, no name, but the phone belonged to the inside of Malenko's logistics cell. The cleanup. Malenko wasn't just testing me, he had confirmed me, and he had been authorized to remove me. I called Alan again. I told him Catherine needed to leave the house that day. He said he could arrange a 4-person protective detail in a hotel in Washington. But he warned me, if Catherine disappeared, Malenko would know his confirmation was correct. He would accelerate. The cleanup would move from planning to execution. The only way to protect her and preserve the operation was to remain exactly where we were, normal as ever, and let the agency handle the takedown on its timeline. I told him there was no way I would use my wife as bait. He told me I already had. That conversation did something to me. It unlocked a coldness I had not accessed since the last time I rotated out of a combat zone. There is a part of a ground branch officer that is not moral or immoral. It is purely operational. It looks at a problem and sees objectives, assets, threats, and timelines. When Alan said Catherine was already bait, that part of me took over. It was not the husband, it was the case officer. I spent the next 48 hours building a parallel operation, not against agency orders, but alongside them. I knew Malenko's routine down to the minute. I knew the blind spots in his surveillance. I knew the routes he would use if he decided to run. I knew the pressure points in his network, the couriers he couldn't afford to lose, the electronics dumps that were vulnerable to interdiction. But most importantly, I knew the one thing Malenko did not know. I was not a soft IT consultant. I had spent 17 years in ground branch, but before that, I had spent 6 years in Marine Force Recon. I had trained in close quarters battle, surveillance detection, and solo direct action. I had run operations where the rule was simple. You move first or you die. Now I started moving. On the 3rd morning after the assault, I followed Malenko to the tire shop. I did it from a distance, using a delivery van I had rented under a corporate alias. I watched him meet the usual courier, a nervous man in a gray Mercedes. But this time Malenko did something new. He handed the courier an envelope of photographs. I watched the courier glance at them, then look up in the direction of our street. He nodded. He put the envelope in his trunk. He drove away. The photographs were of my house, and inside that envelope, there was a photo of me from the traffic camera near my driveway. I was certain. That night, I made my first move against the network. I called in an anonymous tip to the local FBI field office using a cutout. The tip detailed the location of a storage unit in Sterling where Malenko kept a shipment of restricted transceivers. The Bureau hit it within 6 hours. They found enough components to build 35 guidance systems. They arrested 2 men. They did not trace the tip back to the agency. And they did not arrest Malenko. When Malenko saw the news, he stood in his kitchen for 4 minutes without moving. Then he picked up a burner phone and made one call. He was careful. He spoke only 7 words. "We move the package tonight. Bring the truck." The package. Was it Catherine? Was it me? Or was it something else entirely? Something we had missed for months, hidden in plain sight on Maplewood Court. I didn't know, but I knew that when the truck came that night, I would have to make a choice. Stay in the gray world of surveillance and let the agency decide, or step out of the shadows and become the man I had been trained to be. I chose the second, and that was when the first alarm went off inside my own house. It was the driveway motion sensor. A vehicle had just pulled up to my front gate. I turned to the monitor. The headlights flooded the camera. The engine died. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Victor Malenko. He was wearing his black tie. He had something in his right hand. It wasn't a phone. It wasn't a gun. It was a roll of black duct tape. He started walking toward my front door. I didn't wait for him to knock. I moved through the dark house like I had 100 times in Baghdad. I retrieved a Sig Sauer from the biometric safe under the mudroom bench, then stood to the side of the front door, just out of the sightline. Through the narrow side window, I watched Malenko walk up the flagstone path. He moved like a man rehearsing calm. His black GA was open at the chest, the belt tied tight. He held the roll of duct tape in his right hand and swung it lightly against his thigh. When the bell rang, I let it ring twice. Then I opened the door with my left hand only, keeping the Sig behind my hip. Malenko smiled. It was the smile of a man who had won an argument with himself. "Mr. Rourke," he said, "I owe your wife an apology." I didn't respond. I held his gaze and waited. He turned the duct tape in his fingers, as if it were an afterthought. "But she isn't home, is she? Night shift at the pediatric hospital. Very dedicated. Very recognizable in her white coat." The muscles in my forearm tightened. I kept my voice flat. "What do you want?" He tilted his head. "I want the same thing you want. A quiet neighborhood. But our little disagreement about my lawn has become distracting. So I came to make it right. Man to man." He lifted the roll of tape and set it on my doormat with deliberate care. "For your cameras," he said. "You never know when a man needs to cover a lens." Then he turned and walked back toward his house. He didn't hurry. He didn't look back. The whole encounter lasted 90 seconds. I stood in the doorway until his front door closed. Then I bent down. Next to the duct tape was a white envelope I hadn't seen before. My name was not on it. Inside was a single photograph, printed on glossy paper. It showed Catherine walking to her car in the hospital parking garage. The photo had been taken that same week. The timestamp in the corner read, Wednesday, 7:42 at night. Under the photo, in small block letters, were 2 words. She's next. I closed the door and locked it. Then I called Alan. He answered on the second ring, which meant he had been waiting. I told him about the visit, the envelope, the threat. When I finished, there was a pause. Then Alan said something that made my chest go cold. "We lost him at the gym." The FBI had moved on Malenko's network that night. The takedown was supposed to happen at the gym after a late training session, but Malenko never went inside. He had used a decoy driver. The surveillance team followed a Tesla with tinted glass and fake plates. The real Malenko had been in the neighborhood, walking to my door. It was a coordinated counter takedown, and we were the target. Alan told me to stay in the house. He was sending a containment team, but I wasn't listening. I was already pulling up the GPS tracker I had placed in Catherine's car 3 days earlier. The signal showed her vehicle parked in the hospital garage, exactly where it should be. Her shift ended at 11:15. It was now 9:40. I called her. She didn't answer. I called the hospital pharmacy. The charge nurse said Catherine had gone on her break a few minutes ago. She had left her phone at the counter. That was normal. But I knew something she didn't. I told Alan I was going to the hospital. He told me not to. I told him I would call him when it was over. I changed into black cargo pants and a dark jacket. I took a backpack from the hall closet. Inside was a lockpick set, a spare magazine, 2 flex cuffs, and a compact trauma kit. The backpack had been packed for months, just for a night like this. I drove Catherine's Hyundai, not my own vehicle. She had left it at home because I had driven her to work that morning. No, wait. The GPS said her car was at the hospital, so she must have driven herself. I took a rental I kept under a different alias from a nearby storage lot. It was a gray Ford Fusion with no connection to me. The drive to the hospital took 18 minutes. The roads were slick with a light rain. The whole way, I tried her phone every 30 seconds. Each time it went to voicemail. In the silence between rings, I could hear my own pulse. When I pulled into the parking garage, I saw why she hadn't answered. Her phone was lying on the concrete next to her car. The screen was cracked. Her hospital ID badge was beside it. The lanyard snapped. The driver's side door was open. The interior light cast a pale glow over the empty seat. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, just the phone and the badge, left exactly where someone wanted them found. A normal man would have panicked. I didn't. Not then. I scanned the garage, checking the shadows, the blind corners, the exits. The ceiling was low, the fluorescent lights buzzing. The Honda CR-V 2 spots down had a cold engine. The stairwell door on the east wall was propped open with a brick. I walked to the elevator bank, but stopped. There was a black van parked across the aisle facing the exit. It hadn't moved since I entered. The windows were impossible to see through. A thin layer of condensation fogged the windshield. The engine block ticked. It had been running recently. I knew a trap when I was inside one. I didn't run toward the van. I stepped back into the shadows behind a concrete pillar, drew the SIG and called Alan on the encrypted line. "They have Catherine," I said. "Parking garage, level 3, next to her car. I'm looking at a black van, engine warm." Alan's voice was clipped. "Stay put. The FBI containment team is 2 minutes out. Do not engage." 2 minutes is an eternity in this place, I said, and you know it. A long silence. Then Alan said, "There's something you need to know before you do anything." "What?" "The package Malenko moved tonight wasn't electronics. It was a man." My finger hovered over the trigger. "A man?" "His name is Ilya Voronov, former Russian signals intelligence officer. He's been selling classified material to the highest bidder. Malenko's network was never just about components. They were moving people, identities, extraction routes. Voronov was the real prize. He knows the names of at least 4 American officers still undercover in the Balkans." I stared at the black van. It still hadn't moved. "Why are you telling me this now?" There was a beat of hesitation. "Because the FBI just intercepted a second message. Malenko is not going after you for revenge. He's using your wife as leverage to force you to help move Voronov through the airport. You have a background that makes you valuable. If you cooperate, Catherine lives. If you don't, she dies in front of you." I let the words settle. They didn't make my hands shake. They simplified everything. "Then the only way this ends is if Malenko never leaves this garage." I ended the call before Alan could argue. Something moved in the van. The sliding side door opened just a few inches. A thin beam of light spilled out. Then a hand appeared, pale and trembling. It dropped a small white object onto the concrete. It was a piece of jewelry, a silver ring. Catherine's wedding band. The door slid shut. I kept my body behind the pillar and raised the SIG. I had one clear shot at the van's rear tire, but that would not save Catherine. I needed to know who was inside, how many, and whether they would really kill her if I moved. And then I heard it, a soft voice from inside the van, muffled, afraid, but unmistakably hers. "Daniel?" The single word undid 17 years of operational control. I stepped out from behind the pillar. I kept the cig low, pointed at the ground. I walked toward the van with steady, measured steps. My face was calm. My mind was not. The side door slid fully open. A figure climbed out. Not Malenko. It was a smaller man, wiry with a shaved head and a pistol in his fist. He motioned for me to stop. "Dr. Rourke," the man said in accented English, "your wife is alive, but she will not remain that way unless you do exactly as Mr. Malenko says." I was 10 feet from the van now. I could see Catherine in the back seat, her hands bound, a strip of silver tape over her mouth. Her eyes were wide, wet with tears, but she was awake. She shook her head, trying to warn me. I looked past the shaved man into the distance, where the elevator bank flickered. No sign of the FBI. "Malenko wants me to help your package get through security," I said. The man nodded. "You have one opportunity." I lowered the cig and set it on the ground. "Let her go," I said. The man smiled. "Not yet." Then I heard the stairwell door slam. From the shadows walking toward us with a calm, predatory stride came Victor Malenko. He was still wearing his black gi, and in his hand was a black duffel bag, stained with rain. "Mr. Rourke," he said, "I told you this neighborhood would be very interesting." In the end, the quiet street didn't stay quiet. By sunrise, Maplewood Court was a crime scene wrapped in a counterintelligence operation. Malenko was taken into custody before he could activate the extraction route. The shaved man with the pistol never fired a shot, and Catherine walked out of that parking garage on her own 2 feet, shaken but alive, with a new understanding of the man she had married. But the victory came at a price. The operation my agency had run for 8 months collapsed into a public arrest, and the fallout rippled through 3 different intelligence sharing agreements. Alan Mercer retired 6 months later without a ceremony. The safe house was quietly sold. The Pariah State never received its final shipment. The front companies in Limassol were dissolved overnight, leaving nothing but a paper trail that led to no one. Here's the thing that still keeps me up at night. Victor Malenko was not the most dangerous man on that street. He was the most visible one. For every neighbor who slams a wife against a Tesla, there are a dozen who never miss a mortgage payment, never get pulled over, and never appear on a watch list. They coach youth sports. They wave at you from the driveway. They know your dog's name. I spent 17 years learning to see the world in threat matrices. I learned that the most dangerous predators are not the ones who howl in the dark. They are the ones who learn the exact frequency of your normal life and hide inside it. They don't break into your home. They move in next door, tend their lawn, and wait. Catherine asked me once, after it was over, whether I ever regretted letting her live next to a monster for 8 months. I told her the truth. I didn't regret the mission. I regretted that she had to become part of it. She didn't believe me, and I don't blame her. The real question I'm left with is not whether my training saved us. It's what that training cost. There are men and women all over this country who live double lives in quiet subdivisions, doing things that never make the news, protecting people who will never know their names. Some of them are heroes, some of them are monsters. Most of them are something in between. What I can tell you is this: the monster next door was not brought down by a dramatic standoff or a special forces raid. He was brought down because one person paid attention. The details matter. The small inconsistencies matter. The neighbor who doesn't act like a neighbor matters. If there is one thing I want you to take from this, it's not to be afraid of your neighbors. It's to be aware of what your instincts are telling you, because the day you stop noticing is the day you become the soft target. If you've ever had a neighbor who made the hair on the back of your neck stand up, tell me in the comments. I read them. Hit like if this story made you look out your window twice. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that not everything dangerous looks dangerous. And subscribe for more real-life stories about the hidden operations happening in plain sight. Until next time, keep your head up, your doors locked, and your eyes open. The quiet ones are always watching.